Hey guys, today I'll show you a science fiction thriller TV series named The X-Files, Season 3, Part 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama picks up with a hacker breaking into the U.S. Department of Defense, stealing a mysterious file about aliens. This file belonged to a powerful secret organization, so powerful it could manipulate entire governments. The hacker copied the file onto a disk and gave it to Mulder. Scully then found an elderly man to help decipher it. The file turned out to document a World War II-era human experimentation program, a collaboration between Axis powers. Among the list of test subjects was Scully herself. As the investigation deepened, Mulder's father was murdered by the organization. Mulder managed to track down some of the former test subjects, only to find they had been turned into desiccated alien-like corpses. The smoking man from the organization arrived to capture Mulder and retrieve the disk, only to find that Mulder had mysteriously vanished. Frustrated, he ordered the destruction of the corpses and withdrew with his team. With Mulder missing, the smoking man storms the old man's house, demanding to know Mulder's whereabouts. But the family has no idea where he is. Enraged, he beats them and storms off. Shortly after, the old man gathers members of his tribe and heads to the site of Mulder's disappearance. After a thorough search, they uncover Mulder's nearly lifeless body buried beneath a pile of rocks, alongside another alien corpse. How Mulder escaped from the cargo container remains a mystery. Barely clinging to life, he is taken back by the tribe, who begin an ancient healing ritual to save him. During the ritual, Mulder feels as though he's drifting through an otherworldly void. There, he sees the man who once tried to expose the truth, now dead at the hands of the organization, as well as his own father. They urge him not to give up, to keep fighting. In a vision, Mulder returns to the cargo container and witnesses the fate of the test subjects. Transformed into alien-like beings, they were herded into the container, only to have poison gas thrown in. Panicked and desperate, they tried to escape, but death was inevitable. Mulder realizes that these vengeful spirits want him to seek justice on their behalf. Meanwhile, after Mulder's disappearance, Scully is intercepted by the smoking man's forces. They seize the decrypted file and pressure higher-ups into suspending her. Mulder's boss, Skinner, wants to help, but his hands are tied. The organization's influence runs deep, so deep it can bend the government to its will. Disheartened, Scully leaves the bureau, but as she passes through a security checkpoint, the metal detector beeps twice. She's not carrying any metal, not even her service weapon, which was already confiscated. Perplexed, she visits a hospital where doctors discover a tiny metallic object embedded in the back of her neck. Under a microscope, it's revealed to be a microchip, but Scully has no memory of how or when it got there. She entrusts it to her sister for safekeeping. Soon after, Mulder's mother holds a funeral for his father. Scully attends, insisting that Mulder is still alive and in hiding. A mysterious white-haired man is also present. He approaches Scully, revealing himself as a member of the secret organization. He too believes Mulder is alive, but warns that as long as the disk remains with him, the organization will never stop hunting him. He confides in Scully. The organization plans to eliminate everyone who has seen the contents of the file, including her, but he thinks this decision is rash and is warning her in advance. His intentions aren't exactly noble. He's not trying to protect her. He simply wants to avoid the unwanted attention her death would bring to the organization. Elsewhere, Mulder, now fully recovered, returns home and embraces his mother, but he doesn't waste any time. He begins digging through his late father's belongings, searching for clues. The smoking man had hinted at his father's deep connections to the organization. Sure enough, Mulder finds an old photo taken decades ago. In it are his father, the smoking man, and the white-haired man from the funeral, all together. As for what kind of relationship his father had with this organization, even his mother can't say for sure. Scully found herself in trouble again. Her sister called, asking to meet, apparently with something urgent to share. Scully, wary, grabbed her sidearm and headed out. Just as she stepped out the door, she ran into her superior Skinner, who suggested they talk somewhere private. Scully took him to Mulder's now vacant apartment, but the moment they stepped inside, Scully drew her gun on him. It turns out the white-haired man at the funeral had warned her. Assassins from the secret organization might disguise themselves as trusted allies. She feared Skinner might be one of them. Meanwhile, Scully's sister had arrived at Scully's home, only to be shot by an assassin who had just arrived. It was clear they'd made a mistake. Scully had been the intended target all along. Back in the apartment, Skinner pleaded with her to lower the gun, insisting he meant no harm. He had found found the disc in Mulder's desk and had secretly hidden it, intending to hand it over to Scully. Just then, there was a noise outside. Both Scully and Skinner, tense and suspicious, raised their guns at each other at the exact same moment. Scully and Skinner were locked in a standoff, both unwilling to lower their weapons. Just then, someone burst through the door. It was Mulder, finally back after all this time. Mulder quickly aligned himself with Scully, and after some tense moments, the three of them lowered their guns. Furious, Mulder shared everything he'd been through, including the organization's alien gene experiments. Hearing this, Skinner realized just how serious things were. He agreed to join forces with them. Though Mulder and Scully were reunited, there was still much to do. Meanwhile, Scully's sister, mistakenly shot by the assassin, was rushed to the hospital. Scully asked the Native American elder who had helped Mulder to go pray for her sister. Later, Mulder showed a photograph he had found among his father's belongings to a civilian investigation team. In the photo, standing next to his father, was a known Nazi war criminal. After World War II, the U.S. launched Operation Paperclip, offering protection to Nazi scientists in exchange for advanced research. The Nazi criminal had been one of those scientists. So what was Mulder's father doing with a Nazi war criminal? Seeking answers, Mulder and Scully tracked the criminal down. The former war criminal claimed to be full of remorse and now lived a quiet life tending to his garden. He refused to answer any of their questions, saying that even speaking about the past would put his life at risk. Eventually, under pressure, he gave them two clues, something called Napier's Constant and the address of a mining company. Mulder and Scully rushed to the mining company the criminal had mentioned. The place had long been abandoned, but they discovered several heavy doors secured by number locks. Using the clue Napier's Constant, they managed to open one of them. Behind it lay a pitch-black mine shaft filled with rows of cabinets, each holding personal files. Mulder found a cabinet labeled 1965, and inside, he discovered Scully's file. He then searched by birth date and found his sister Samantha's file too. Suddenly, he heard a noise outside. Telling Scully to stay put, he went out to check. Outside the mine, Mulder witnessed a massive spaceship slowly rising into the air. At the same time, inside the tunnel, Scully spotted a group of humanoid aliens fleeing deeper into the shaft. She chased after them and saw one clearly at the tunnel's end, just before it vanished in a flash of light. Mulder, now on the rooftop, watched the spaceship ascend higher and higher until it disappeared. Meanwhile, agents from the secret organization had arrived at the mine. Mulder rushed back inside, warned Scully, and the two escaped through a back exit in the tunnel. At daybreak, they met with Skinner. He told them that running like fugitives couldn't go on forever. He suggested trading the disc they had for a deal with the smoking man, get their jobs and safety back in exchange. Scully, desperate to see her critically injured sister, finally agreed. Skinner visited Scully's sister in the hospital, where he noticed a suspicious man lurking in the hallway. He gave chase but was ambushed in a stairwell by the man and an accomplice, who beat him down and stole the disc he'd been carrying. The man who stole the disc was none other than Alex, a former FBI agent and the same man who had killed Mulder's father. Though he'd completed his mission, Alex quickly realized the organization now saw him as a loose end. They'd planted a bomb in his car. Sensing something was wrong, Alex jumped out just in time before the car exploded, destroying the disc the organization had been desperate to eliminate. Mulder and Scully went to visit the Nazi criminal's greenhouse, only to find the white-haired man already waiting for them. He informed them that the Nazi criminal had died of a heart attack. Mulder pulled out the photo of his father and demanded to know why this man was in it. The white-haired man explained that he and Mulder's father went way back. They had both been part of Operation Paperclip. In 1947, after a UFO crash in New Mexico, the U.S. government recovered the remains of an alien body. Desperate to unlock alien technology, the government secretly recruited Nazi scientists after World War II to help with the research. Their goal is to fuse alien DNA with human genetics to create a more powerful breed of humans. Under government orders, Mulder's father had been tasked with collecting genetic data from civilians born after 1950, just like the files Mulder and Scully found in the mine. That data was later used by the Nazi scientists to select subjects for human experimentation. When Mulder's father discovered the truth, he strongly objected and threatened to expose the project. In retaliation, the organization kidnapped Samantha, Mulder's sister, as leverage. Before leaving, the white-haired man warned Mulder if he insisted on uncovering the truth, he might not live much longer. Later, Skinner met with the smoking man and pleaded for Mulder and Scully's safety, asking that their FBI positions be reinstated. But the smoking man, knowing the disc had been destroyed in the explosion, now had the upper hand. He coldly threatened Skinner, saying there were 100 ways he could make him die in an accident. But Skinner wasn't bluffing either. He admitted he no longer had the disc, but had already shared its contents with the Native American elder. According to tribal tradition, the elder had then passed the information to his people, who were scattered across 4 different states. Skinner said, unless he planned to wipe out every last one of them, he'd better make sure nothing happens to Mulder and Scully, because if it does, the truth will be on the front page of every newspaper in the country. At the end of the story, Scully finally made it to the hospital, but it was too late. Her sister had succumbed to her injuries. In their pursuit of the truth, Mulder and Scully had lost so much, but now, with their FBI positions reinstated, they no longer had to live like fugitives. A new chapter had begun, and many more secrets were waiting to be uncovered. This episode marks a key moment in the main storyline. Through it, we learn why the shadowy organization possesses information about UFOs and alien genetics, and what really happened in the abduction of Samantha. It's likely that the organization has long been in contact with extraterrestrials and has even formed an alliance with them. The white-haired man mentioned that they kidnapped Mulder's sister to keep his father from exposing their experiments. Yet in Mulder's own memory, Samantha was taken by aliens. The scene shifts to a small American town where a guy was playing a fighting game late at night in a dimly lit arcade. He wasn't very good, quickly getting KO'd by the system. Frustrated, he turned to leave, accidentally bumping into a lanky young man wearing a cap whose name is Darren. He was a friend of the arcade owner. Darren quietly told the player that he had been using that machine all night and had only stepped away for a moment. But the other guy scoffed at him, clearly unimpressed by his frail build. He shoved Darren twice without hesitation. That was a mistake. Darren's anger flared. Sensing trouble, the other guy jumped into his sports car, thinking he could outrun any confrontation. But Darren came after him. In a sudden flash of lightning and sparks, the guy died in his vehicle. His body was sent to the local police station where Mulder and Scully were called in to investigate. The autopsy showed ruptured eardrums, cataract-like eye damage, severe internal injuries, and a nearly cooked heart, consistent with a high-voltage electric shock. But there were no external signs of electric contact. Scully theorized he had been struck by lightning. The local coroner informed Scully that there had been 5 similar cases recently. All victims had died from high-voltage shock except one survivor. As with this case, no contact points were ever found, and lightning was ruled the default cause of death. But that seemed statistically suspicious. Lightning kills only about 60 people annually across the entire U.S., and this small town alone had 5 cases. Scully began to suspect these weren't random accidents, but intentional killings. The town's sheriff, stubborn and arrogant, dismissed the idea entirely. To him, lightning fatalities in a storm-prone area were nothing out of the ordinary. Scully knew her theory lacked hard evidence, so she endured the sheriff's ridicule in silence. Determined to prove their case, Mulder and Scully returned to the scene of the latest death, the sports car. The coroner had placed the time of death at around 11 p.m. the night before. At that hour, most businesses were closed, except for the arcade. Mulder and Scully showed the arcade owner a photo of the deceased. The arcade owner confirmed the guy had been playing there last night. He led them to the game console the guy had used. While the owner claimed not to know what happened after the guy left, Mulder noticed the high-score leaderboard on the screen. At the top of the list was Darren. With the timestamp showing he had played around 11 p.m., Darren was the sole survivor of the 5 lightning-related cases. They traced Darren to a local auto repair shop where he worked. Though small and skinny, Darren was infatuated with the shop owner's wife, Sharon. He constantly fawned over her, offering help whenever he could. But Sharon, happily married, always turned him down. Mulder and Scully tracked down Darren, who claimed he had been so absorbed in his game at the arcade that he had no idea about the guy's death. Just then, Scully noticed Mulder's cell phone heating up in his pocket until it suddenly melted. Both of them were baffled. Later that night, Darren returned home after work. His elderly mother was sitting on the couch watching TV. She clearly didn't think much of him, mocking him as she watched a Daniel C.C. movie show. She said even the rebellious tattooed youth on the screen was more impressive than Darren, and no woman would ever fall for a skinny, useless guy like him. Harsh words, especially from his own mother. Just then, the arcade owner showed up to warn Darren that the F.B.I. was now investigating the case. But Darren didn't trust him. He figured the arcade owner must have already ratted him out. Still, he didn't care. After years of his mother's constant belittling, all Darren wanted was to prove his worth. And his idea of proving himself was to walk out to a farm to summon lightning. In no time, several bolts struck him, but Darren was completely unharmed. Grinning, he turned to the arcade owner and said, "It felt amazing." Darren might have been fine, but 3 cows weren't so lucky. They were found dead the next morning. Sitting by the roadside, Darren and the arcade owner talked. The latter knew Darren was infatuated with his boss's wife, Sharon. He tried to talk sense into him. After all, her husband was good-looking, wealthy, and well-liked. But something dark was brewing in Darren's mind. He began to think that if he got rid of his boss, he might have a shot with Sharon. So he manipulated traffic lights, causing the man to crash his car. Then, twistedly, he used his powers to perform CPR and brought him back from the brink of death. It was his way of showing off. The man was taken to the hospital. Darren's increasingly unhinged behavior finally caught the attention of Mulder and Scully. They looked into the hospital records from months ago, when Darren had first been struck by lightning. It turned out he had a condition, severe hypokalemia, which made his body uniquely conductive, possibly allowing it to generate high-voltage electricity. They arrested him, but lacking concrete evidence, could only hold him for 72 hours. Hoping for a breakthrough, they turned to Sharon. She told them Darren had been pursuing her for a long time. And once he gained his powers, he began killing to prove how strong he was, always bragging to her afterward. She had wanted to go to the police, but knew the town's bull-headed sheriff wouldn't believe her smelly bullshit, so she kept quiet. But now, with Darren disrupting her life more and more, she promised Mulder and Scully that she'd testify in court. Unfortunately, things took a turn. The incompetent sheriff dismissed Scully's theory as pseudoscience and released Darren early. Upon release, Darren went straight to the arcade. He killed the arcade owner, his only friend. Then he made his way to the hospital where Sharon was caring for her injured husband. Mulder and Scully arrived just in time to intervene, but Sharon, afraid of provoking Darren, reluctantly agreed to go with him. As they drove, Darren talked dreamily about their future, how he could get money from any ATM, hotwire any car on the road. But before he could finish, Sharon took her chance and ran. She never liked him after all. The rejection pushed Darren over the edge. He flew into a frenzy. The skies darkened, wind howled, thunder roared, lightning flashed. The sheriff arrived, only to be overwhelmed by the storm Darren had summoned. In a climactic moment, Darren electrocuted the sheriff, who paid the ultimate price for his arrogance. Moments later, Darren was struck by lightning himself and passed out. In the end, Darren was placed under strict surveillance in a prison facility. The young man who went mad for love would now face the consequences of his actions. The scene shifts to an elderly man buying groceries at a convenience store. As he walks out, he bumps into a man coming in. The two attempt to move out of each other's way, but keep stepping in the same direction several times before finally passing by. The old man heads home, while the younger man visits a fortune teller. He tells her he's deeply confused, because he can see his own future. He knows he's going to do terrible things, but he doesn't understand why. Then, without warning, he gets up and murders the fortune teller. The next day, police arrive at the crime scene. It's brutal. The victim's eyes have been gouged out and placed neatly on the table, but her sexy body is missing. With no leads to go on, the authorities bring in a celebrity psychic. After a flashy display of theatrics and vague guesses, the so-called psychic makes up a few clues and dramatically leaves. Mulder and Scully scoff at the performance, but the desperate police decide to treat it as legitimate. At this point, they'll take anything. Cut to the elderly man from the beginning. He turns out to be an insurance salesman, but not a very good one. His kind neighbor owns a pet dog. As he chats with her, he glances at the dog and casually asks whether she has enough dog food stocked up. The woman instantly shuts the door in his face. Later, as the old man heads downstairs to throw out his trash, he suddenly stops and looks back at a garbage bin, as if sensing something. He calls the police. Inside the bin is the dismembered body of the murdered fortune teller. Mulder and Scully question him. They're puzzled. How did he know the corpse had its eyes removed when he never opened the bin or saw the body? He even correctly mentions the murder weapon was a shard from a crystal ball. Mulder suspects the man might have some sort of psychic ability and brings him to the crime scene. The old man walks around quietly, then says, the killer can't control himself. He's going to strike again. He also predicts that the next day, they'll find another female body in a lake. He sighs and mutters that he had seen too many deaths. And sure enough, the next day, another woman's body is found in a lake, just as he predicted. This time, Mulder is convinced the old man is the real deal, not like the charlatan from earlier. He visits the man again, asking for help to catch the killer. At first, the old man refuses. He believes the future shouldn't be tampered with. Changing it could set off a disastrous chain of events, but Mulder eventually persuades him to try. Meanwhile, Scully examines the body from the lake and finds a keychain with a logo from a tech company. The company's CEO is a 43-year-old man. Scully plans to question him, but the old man warns her. It's already too late since the CEO is dead. Following the old man's guidance, they search a wooded area and eventually uncover the CEO's body buried in the mud. As with the previous victims, there are no clear clues, except for one fiber from a piece of clothing. The old man sniffs it like a dog, and suddenly he sees a vision. He sees Mulder storming into a hotel kitchen. The killer is hiding just behind him. Mulder slips on a pie on the floor, and as he glances down, the killer rushes forward and slashes his throat with a knife. The old man shares everything he saw, except for the part about Mulder being murdered. Soon after, he receives a letter. It's from the killer, who already foresaw that the old man would help the FBI. The letter also reveals that the killer has foreseen their meeting in the future. Mulder becomes concerned that the killer may now be targeting the old man, so he and Scully decide to take turns guarding him. But the old man confesses he's already seen his own death. He'll die before ever meeting the killer face to face. That night, while Scully is with him, he calmly describes the scene of his death. He says he saw himself dying in bed with Scully holding his hand and looking down at him with sympathy. Then he'll shed a single tear. Scully doesn't believe in psychic visions. She assumes he's just being dramatic and brushes it off with a smile. Meanwhile, the killer seeks out another fortune teller. Using tarot cards, the fortune teller senses the man's confusion. He's unable to stop himself from committing terrible acts, but he tells the killer that a brown-haired woman will soon bring an end to his turmoil. All the tarot cards have been turned over, except one. The killer admits the reading is incredibly accurate, but then he points to the last card, saying that one is not for himself, but the fortune teller. Puzzled, the fortune teller flips the final card. It's the death card. The outcome is all too predictable. He becomes the killer's next victim. When Mulder and Scully receive the report, they rush to the new crime scene. Before leaving, they ask a young officer to stay behind and watch over the old man. On her way out, Scully bumps into a hotel waiter. When she arrives at the scene, she spots a tarot card lying nearby. On it, a picture of the very same waiter. Moments later, she finds a fiber under her fingernail that closely matches one found on a previous victim. In a flash of realization, Scully understands. The killer is the waiter she just passed by. Back at the apartment, the young officer casually jokes with the old man, asking if he can foresee how he'll die. The old man says nothing. He just looks at him with deep sympathy. The officer, brushing it off, tells him not to open the door for anyone. Then he steps into the bathroom. A knock soon sounds at the door. Ignoring the officer's warning, the old man opens it. Standing there is the hotel waiter, the killer. This is the second time they've met, but neither man is surprised. They've both seen this moment coming. The killer asks a question that's haunted him. Why can't he stop himself from killing? The old man replies that it's because he was born to kill. The truth lifts a weight off the killer's mind. Smiling, he pulls out his knife and prepares to strike, but the old man calmly says he won't die by his hand. Just then, the officer steps out of the bathroom. The killer turns and stabs him to death. By the time Mulder and Scully arrive at the hotel, both the old man and the killer are gone. Mulder chases the suspect into the hotel kitchen. Suddenly, he steps on a pie, the same detail the old man had described in one of his visions. Mulder immediately spins around, expecting the killer behind him, but the killer isn't there. He changed his position. He ambushes Mulder from the side and nearly overpowers him. Just as Mulder begins to fade, Scully bursts in and shoots the killer dead. In the final scenes, Mulder and Scully return to the old man's apartment. On the door hangs a letter with the neighbor's pet dog sitting quietly. In the letter, the old man reveals that his kind old neighbor passed away the previous night and that the dog made a mistake he hopes they'll forgive. He also asks Scully to take the dog in. They unlock the door and find the old man has taken his own life. Scully sits by his bed holding his hand. A single tear rolls from his eye, just as he once described to her. In this story, the signs of the old man's fate were there all along. His ability to foresee both the past and the future made him wise, but also tormented. He was a traditionalist to his core, convinced that destiny couldn't and shouldn't be changed. He knew the killer would murder Mulder and the officer, yet said nothing. He even opened the door, fully aware of who the killer was. He believed in letting fate run its course. He told Scully he had foreseen his death, and though he could have chosen to live, he chose not to. But Mulder didn't die, and that alone proves fate can be changed. The real reason the old man chose to end his life was because of the emotional weight of his gift. He had seen too many deaths, too much pain. For someone like him, perhaps death was the only peace left. Like the old man, the killer could also see the future. Their first encounter, in that awkward back and forth at the convenience store, was no coincidence. It was fate. The killer's deepest question was, why can't he stop killing? He searched for answers from countless fortune tellers but got nowhere, until one told him the truth: he was born that way. A natural-born killer doesn't need a reason. The last fortune teller he met said a brown-haired woman would end his confusion. That woman was Scully, and she ended it with a bullet. It turns out, ending the confusion didn't mean enlightenment, it meant death. The final scene left us with one last little mystery: the neighbor's dog. In his letter, the old man mentioned that his neighbor had passed away the night before, and he asked Scully to forgive the little dog for something it had done wrong. But what exactly did the dog do? Here's a small clue. At the beginning, the old man visited his neighbor's apartment. He glanced at the pet dog and then immediately asked the neighbor if they had enough dog food stocked up. I think most of you have already figured it out. I'll leave the rest unsaid. The scene shifts to a private prison in the U.S. where an inmate named Nietzsche is sentenced to death after serving 11 years behind bars. On the day of his execution, his wife visits him for the last time. Tearfully, she tells him she will never love another man. Nietzsche is then led to the electric chair. The warden asks if he has any final words. Nietzsche responds that during his 11 years in prison, he worked hard and behaved well, but still ended up on death row by the warden's own order. He says he's made a list of 5 names, and when he dies, he'll be reincarnated to take revenge on each of them. The warden, unmoved, dismisses it as nonsense and walks out, instructing the executioner to flip the switch. 3 days later, Mulder and Scully are called in to investigate a bizarre case. A prison guard at that same private facility has died under very unusual circumstances. According to reports, Nietzsche had threatened to get revenge on those who mistreated him, even after death. Mulder and Scully are sent to uncover the truth behind the guard's mysterious death. The warden meets with them and casually remarks that Nietzsche was an intelligent man. Scully requests to examine the body, but as soon as she sees the corpse, she's horrified. The guard has only been dead a few days, yet his body is already decomposing and crawling with insects. Meanwhile, Mulder questions a dreadlocked inmate who used to be close to Nietzsche. The inmate says Nietzsche practiced a form of dark voodoo and believed he would ascend to godhood after death. He's certain Nietzsche has come back for revenge. Scully heads to Nietzsche's old cell. A balding prison guard tells her that everything inside is just as Nietzsche left it. No one has touched a thing. On Nietzsche's pillow, Scully finds traces of blood. 2 strange flies buzz around the room. Down the hall, Scully runs into another guard named Vincent. He tells her that Nietzsche had mentioned a 5-person hit list, and the recently deceased guard was the first on it. That means 4 more are still in danger. Vincent also says the list is supposedly in the hands of an inmate named Sam. Cut to a scene where several inmates are painting cell walls. As they work, another guard is discovered dead. Like the first, he has begun to rot far too quickly, and worms are crawling out of his body. The coroner says the worms are actually the larvae of a specific kind of fly. According to the autopsy, both guards were already carrying the larvae before they died. The whole situation is growing stranger by the minute. Mulder starts to take the hit list seriously. With 2 deaths already, the idea of a list of 5 doesn't seem so far-fetched. And if the rumors are true, that list is with Sam. Sam, clearly enjoying the attention, claims he overheard Nietzsche telling the dreadlocked inmate the names. He confirms the 2 dead guards were definitely on it. Now, he wants to make a deal. Give him early release and he'll hand over the list. Mulder and Scully go to the warden to see if there's any way to negotiate a reduced sentence for Sam. Unsurprisingly, the warden refuses the proposal. As they argue and walk back toward his office, the warden opens the door and is met with a gruesome sight. The corpse of the second dead guard is sitting upright in his office chair. The message is chilling, and the mystery has only deepened. Mulder said that if they wanted to uncover the truth behind Nietzsche's 5-person hit list, they had to start by looking into the people closest to him. So they paid a visit to Nietzsche's wife. She confirmed that the 2 guards who had died were indeed among those who had abused Nietzsche during his time in prison. That's why Nietzsche held a deep grudge. She also revealed that the voodoo Nietzsche practiced had made him incredibly powerful, so much so that no one could kill him. During the conversation, Scully noticed that the wife was visibly trembling. Eventually, the truth came out. She had been secretly living with the prison guard, Vincent, the same officer who had first told Scully about the hit list. Judging by how comfortable they were, it seemed the 2 had been involved for quite a while. The wife was terrified that Nietzsche's ghost would come after her in revenge. She was so afraid because she was likely cheating on Nietzsche while he was still alive. Back at the prison, with Mulder and Scully away, the warden took matters into his own hands. He summoned Sam for a private interrogation. In the prison shower room, the warden demanded the names on the list. Sam eventually confessed. The warden was the last one. Furious, the warden beat Sam to death, then blamed it on Nietzsche's ghost. Mulder, however, didn't buy it. He believed Nietzsche had no reason to kill Sam, which meant the killer had to be someone else. He also pointed out that everyone on Nietzsche's list had caused him serious harm, so the list had to include the executioner, the one who pushed the button during Nietzsche's electrocution. But when they tracked that man down, it was already too late. He was dead too, and just like the guards before him, his corpse was infested with maggots, larvae of that same strange fly species. Digging deeper, Mulder discovered that Nietzsche had been in frequent contact with a lawyer, the same court-appointed defense attorney who had represented him years ago. At the time, the lawyer was only 26, inexperienced, and ultimately lost Nietzsche's case. It goes without saying, he was definitely on the list. Right after Mulder and Scully left, Nietzsche's ghost appeared and smothered the lawyer to death with a pillow. Let's tally things up. 5 people have now died. 2 guards who abused Nietzsche, inmate Sam, the executioner, and Nietzsche's former lawyer. Sam was killed by the warden, but the others all showed signs of those same fly larvae, confirming they were killed by Nietzsche's ghost. And in the lawyer's case, Nietzsche appeared in person. That makes 4 confirmed victims from the hit list. So, who's next? Eventually, Mulder and Scully found out that Nietzsche's wife was in a relationship with someone, none other than the prison guard Vincent. The warden chimed in, saying Vincent had only been working there for 6 months and had always acted suspiciously. Connecting the dots, Mulder and Scully realized something. Only a prison guard could have accessed the warden's office and placed a corpse there. It had to be Vincent. But when they rushed to Nietzsche's wife's home, it was too late. Vincent had already been shot dead. Nietzsche's wife claimed she saw her husband's ghost and insisted that Vincent had been possessed by Nietzsche, which is why she pulled the trigger. With no witnesses to dispute her story, and despite the suspicious circumstances, the police quickly closed the case, blaming all the deaths on the now deceased Vincent. Hearing the news of Vincent's death, the warden breathed a sigh of relief. According to the police report, there was no hit list, no ghost, no supernatural revenge, just a mentally unstable woman and a deranged guard. Feeling victorious, the warden drove off in his car singing cheerfully, but soon a few flies appeared inside the vehicle. Then, in the rearview mirror, he saw Nietzsche's reflection. Nietzsche lunged forward, smothering his face. The warden's car veered off the road and slammed into a tree, killing him instantly. It turns out the warden was the final name on the list, and that brings this case to a close. Let's break down the core story again. Nietzsche's ghost killed 5 people, each of whom had wronged him in life. 2 guards, 1 executioner, 1 lawyer, and the ruthless warden. Every time Nietzsche appeared, a strange swarm of flies accompanied him, likely a product of the voodoo he practiced. A secondary plotline centered around the warden's cruelty. He routinely abused prisoners, even beating some to death in the shower. It's possible that guard Vincent, disturbed by these actions, placed the corpses in the warden's office as a form of protest or warning. At the beginning of the episode, Nietzsche's wife had clutched his hand and promised she would never love anyone else. But in truth, she had already cheated and moved in with Vincent. Once she heard that Nietzsche's ghost was out for revenge, the guilt and fear overwhelmed her. Paranoid and mentally unstable, she mistook Vincent for Nick and shot him dead in a panic. Given the circumstances, her actions were, sadly, all too understandable. The scene shifts to the dim glow of a street lamp where a car sat parked. Inside, a young woman in fat was deep in conversation with a gentleman. From their chat, we learned they'd been talking online for over 3 months, and this was their first time meeting in person. His charm and manners completely swept her off her feet. But then, a strange detail. A patch of raw, peeling skin was visible on the man's neck. As he leaned in and tongue massaged her chubby face, she suddenly let out a greasy, blood-curdling scream. The next morning, a police officer on patrol noticed the parked car. After knocking on the window several times without getting a response, he leaned closer to take a look inside and recoiled in horror. Mulder and Scully soon arrived at the scene. The woman in fat from the night before was almost unrecognizable. Her body looked like it had melted into greasy soaps. Mulder collected samples of the liquefied tissue and explained to Scully that 4 women had gone missing in the past month. Of those, only 1 body had been found, and it showed the same terrifying signs, completely melted down. Since the latest victim's remains were still somewhat intact, Scully quickly had the body transported to the lab for further examination. But when she opened the freezer, she found only a skeleton. Everything else had dissolved. Lab tests revealed high concentrations of stomach acid and digestive enzymes in the tissue. The woman had clearly been overweight, yet her body now contained almost no fat. The conclusion was that it was extracted by some kind of a fat-sucking killer. From the victim's family, Mulder learned she had been chatting online with someone she really clicked with and was on her way to meet him when she vanished. Mulder immediately suspected that this online friend was the killer. He contacted the FBI and issued a citywide alert, warning women not to meet strangers from the internet. On the other side of town, the fat-sucking man was already scoping out his next target online. He set his sights on Ellen, a middle-aged woman with a fuller figure. Using the same tactics, he messaged her with a request to meet. Ellen was thrilled by the invitation. She picked out a new outfit, touched up her makeup, and practiced smiles in the mirror, ready for her big night. But her family was worried. They'd seen the FBI warnings about a killer luring women through dating apps and urged her to stay home for her own safety. Maybe it was their concern, maybe her own insecurity, but Ellen ultimately backed out and stood the man up. The fat sucker waited for hours, but Ellen never showed. Hungry and desperate, he wandered the streets until he spotted another overweight woman. He lured her into a dark alley, drained every ounce of fat from her body instead of her hormones, and in the struggle, she managed to scratch his arm. Her body was soon discovered, and Scully noticed bits of skin under her fingernails. Lab results confirmed that the killer had scratch marks, and even more bizarrely, that the skin samples lacked any trace of oil or fat. Mulder theorized that the killer had undergone some sort of genetic mutation. His body couldn't produce fat naturally, but it could secrete digestive enzymes capable of melting and absorbing it from others. In order to survive, he needed to harvest fat from his fat victims, which is actually a great favor done to the fat ladies. Back at his apartment, the fat sucker tried to patch up his wound. On his way out, he bumped into his sexy landlady and her blind daughter. We learn he's a freelance writer, and the sexy landlady, perhaps trying to get closer to him, mentioned she'd written some poetry and hoped he'd take a look and check on her hormones. But the man barely acknowledged her. Perhaps she was too thin to interest him. Later, as he brooded over his next move, a message popped up. Ellen, the woman who'd stood him up, was now asking to meet. At the same time, local police had begun house-to-house checks in hopes of identifying the killer. One officer forced open the man's apartment door and noticed the scratch on his hand. As shown earlier, the last victim had skin fragments under her nails. The police had already guessed the killer would be wounded. Panicking, the fat sucker killed the officer, then made his way to a restaurant to meet Ellen. During their date, Ellen noticed the peeling skin on his arm. He brushed it off, saying it was just eczema. Back at his apartment, the landlady, still eager for his hormone attention, decided to drop off her poetry. Finding him gone, she let her sexy self in with a spare key and took the opportunity to snoop around. The killer had a pleasant conversation with Ellen. After their date, Ellen drove him home. The man had planned to trick Ellen into coming upstairs, but when he looked up, he saw that his own house lights were on. He quickly abandoned any notion of being a gentleman, didn't even say goodbye, and got out of the car to head inside. Meanwhile, the landlady discovered the body of the police officer she had met earlier that day. Since she had such a knack for self-destructive behavior, the fat sucker decided she was going to die with him. Not long after, the landlady's blind daughter arrived at his house, wondering where her mother was, only to find she wasn't there. Confused, she left the house. Unexpectedly, the daughter called the police. Although she couldn't see, she had smelled her mother's perfume in the house, and in that moment, she deduced that her mother had been killed. The police found the bodies of both the officer and the landlady at the fat sucker's house, but he had already disappeared. Before he left, he intentionally destroyed his computer's hard drive. Since the man had no identity or bank accounts, this made the search much harder. So where did he go? The answer was Ellen's house. The poor woman, completely unaware of the danger, warmly welcomed him into her greasy home. The police managed to recover data from his computer, which contained a list of his online contacts. Some of these women were already dead. Scully immediately called the women on the list to warn them and sent out emails. Meanwhile, Ellen was still overjoyed, seeing the fat sucker as her ideal man who might help her lose fat. At that moment, she received an email from the FBI with a wanted poster and a portrait of the man. On the other side, Scully had already contacted all of his remaining online victims, except for Ellen, who hadn't answered her phone. Scully and Mulder decided to visit Ellen's house in person. By now, Ellen was in serious danger. The fat sucker knew his identity had been exposed and decided to act on Ellen immediately. Scully and Mulder arrived at Ellen's house just in time to interrupt the killer's plan. While Ellen had lost some fat, she wasn't in any immediate danger. Mulder jumped out the window to pursue the fat sucker, but to his surprise, the man hadn't gone anywhere. He was hiding in the bathroom and attacked Scully. Just as he was about to take Scully's fat, Ellen had somehow managed to get back up despite her injuries, shooting him and knocking him out. The fat sucker was arrested and sent to prison. With no more fat to feed on, he was now unrecognizable, his skin starting to peel off. According to his confession, he had killed 47 greasy women over the years. The scene shifts to a military officer being sent to a military hospital after his 3 failed suicide attempts. He tells the doctor that someone has been stopping him from taking his life, pointing to a figure in the mirror. When the doctor looks, there's nothing there. Soon after, when no one is around, the officer runs to the steam room, planning to jump into the boiling water. At that moment, an invisible force triggers the room's alarm. The alarm draws in firefighters and doctors who rescue the officer. Though badly burned, he didn't die, and he looked up and said someone wouldn't let him die. So who is this someone the officer speaks of? 3 weeks later, Mulder and Scully arrive at the hospital. The officer, disfigured by his burns, is in decent mental condition. He explains that no one believes him, but the figure that stops him from dying looks like a soldier's ghost. Every time he appears, he stands at attention. The officer says the ghost first appeared months ago, telling him his good days were over before setting fire to his family's home. After losing his family in the fire, the officer was devastated and wanted to end his life, but the ghost always stopped him, preventing him from succeeding in his 3 suicide attempts. It sounds almost like a fairy tale, and Scully, believing it could be PTSD from his time in Iraq, thinks this is all in the officer's head. However, Mulder isn't so sure. Mulder then pulls out an X-ray and waves it around in the officer's room. They're interrupted by a female officer who takes them to meet with the general. The general dismisses the officer's claims, saying the soldier's ghost is just his imagination. Besides, this is a military matter, and Mulder and Scully's investigation is an overstep. Scully argues, pointing out that 6 months ago, another officer had his family killed in a fire, and he also claimed to have seen the ghost. The general reluctantly agrees to let them continue their investigation. After they leave, the general himself experiences strange occurrences. First, a soldier-like figure stands outside his door, then vanishes. Next, his answering machine starts playing odd noises. But that's just the beginning. That night, while swimming alone, the female officer is drowned by an invisible force in the pool. Her death deeply saddens the general, who had worked closely with her for years and considered her like a daughter. Mulder tells the general that if things continue, his family will be in danger. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the general finally confesses. He tells Mulder that he too saw the ghostly soldier and heard strange noises coming from his answering machine. Meanwhile, the general's son saw a shadowy figure in their house who stole some mail and then fled the scene. The 3 rush to the house where they see the shadow again. They chase it and find footprints in the sand. It turns out the shadow is a retired soldier, bald and missing limbs, who has a friend named Rappo, another soldier who lost his limbs on the battlefield. From their conversation, it seems the bald soldier has been staying at the hospital to care for Rappo and helped him steal those letters from the general's house. Mulder and Scully quickly arrest the bald soldier based on the fingerprints and bald footprints left at the general's house. Scully finds the stolen letters at the bald soldier's home. These letters aren't just from the general, but also from the families of the previous 2 officers who died. It seems that all 3 mysterious deaths are linked to the bald soldier, and now there's undeniable evidence. But the bald soldier insists he was only stealing the letters, and the real killer is Rappo, who, despite being wheelchair-bound and missing his limbs, is somehow behind the murders. Rappo, lying harmless in his cell, looks completely harmless as he sleeps. But the bald soldier, now locked up, is frantic, shouting that Rappo is going to come kill him. Sure enough, a few hours later, Scully discovers the bald soldier has been smothered to a bald death with a bedsheet in his cell, which is highly secured. Nothing could have entered. Scully concludes it was suicide, but Mulder disagrees. He believes Rappo, the limbless man, is the true killer. But how could Rappo have done it? Mulder pulled out a few small X-rays. It turns out he had been carrying them with him over the past few days, conducting tests in the officer's hospital room, the pool where the female officer died, and the general's office. Everywhere the phantom soldier had appeared, the X-rays showed shadows from radiation. Mulder had heard of military experiments that involved special soldiers whose souls could detach from their bodies to carry out covert missions. It's possible that Rappo was one of these test subjects. Every time his soul left his body, he needed something from the victims' homes as a medium. That's why he forced the bald soldier to steal letters from the officers and the general's homes. Mulder and Scully went to Rappo's room, where he was lounging on his bed watching Daniel's CCTV series. When questioned by Mulder, Rappo feigned ignorance, denying everything. However, he didn't hide his contempt for the general, blaming him for his current condition. After they left, the general saw Rappo's ghost in the mirror. Later, his wife was found murdered by Rappo in their home. Enraged, the general grabbed a gun and headed to the hospital. He told the burnt officer that Rappo had killed his wife, and in his grief, he planned to commit suicide. The officer tried to stop him, saying that Rappo was the one who killed his wife too. With that, the general put aside his suicidal thoughts and rushed to Rappo's room. Rappo taunted the general, saying he killed his wife and blaming the general for sending him to Iraq. He then challenged the general to kill him now. That way, the general would be disgraced and might even end up in a mental institution. After much thought, the general walked out of the room, leaving Rappo devastated. He called after him, saying if the general was not going to kill him, he might as well just kill the general. By the time Mulder arrived, the general had taken the elevator downstairs, stopping at the hospital's equipment room. There, Rappo attacked him. Mulder rushed to the scene and found Rappo once again in a sleep-like state, his face twitching, suggesting that his soul had left his body to attack the general. Mulder and the general fought side by side, both being assaulted by Rappo's ghostly apparition. Meanwhile, Scully struggled to wake Rappo in the hospital room. Just as the situation grew dire, the burnt officer arrived, leaning on a cane. He locked himself in Rappo's room and smothered Rappo with a pillow. In that instant, Rappo's ghost vanished before their eyes. In the end, the case couldn't be fully linked to Rappo, and it was left unresolved. The disfigured officer, having killed Rappo, was punished and became an errand boy for the general. The two men, having lost their families, would spend the rest of their lives in solitude. In this story, the burnt officer knew all along that Rappo was the killer. He had seen Rappo's ghost, and having been in the hospital for so long, must have encountered Rappo's physical form at least once. His delay in seeking revenge was likely due to waiting for the right opportunity. When the general appeared, the officer knew his chance had come. Initially, he planned to have the general kill Rappo to avenge his family, but when the general hesitated, the officer had to smother Rappo himself. The scene shifts to Tennessee, where a train arrives carrying several carriages labeled with a special number. That night, a group of Japanese scientists arrives at one of the carriages. They're performing an autopsy on some sort of creature that has green blood. Suddenly, a fully armed military squad storms in, killing the scientists and taking the unidentified alien body on the table. It's then revealed that the creature is, in fact, an alien corpse. A few days later, Mulder spends $30 on a magazine to buy a videotape. On it is footage of the scientists performing the alien autopsy. At first, neither Mulder nor Scully take it seriously, but when the military squad bursts in at the end of the footage, they begin to question whether this could be a real event. Mulder tells Scully that the seller claimed he copied the tape via satellite. But when they arrive at the seller's place, they find him dead, and Mulder manages to arrest the killer, a Japanese man carrying a briefcase. Mulder hands the man over to the local police, but soon, Skinner arrives. It turns out the man is a high-ranking Japanese diplomat, and under pressure, they are forced to release him. Although the diplomat is released, Mulder secretly keeps the briefcase, which contains satellite photos and a list with the name Betsy highlighted. The two decide to split up. Scully investigates Betsy while Mulder looks into the satellite photos. Mulder's contact tells him the photos are of a salvage ship called Trofs, and the photos were taken by a Japanese satellite. From the ship's trajectory, it appears to have passed through the Panama Canal and arrived at a naval shipyard. Mulder sneaks aboard the ship docked at the harbor, but he finds nothing suspicious, until shortly after, a military squad arrives, apparently looking for him. To avoid capture, Mulder jumps into the water and escapes. He then follows the military vehicles to the naval shipyard, where he sneaks to the outside of a large warehouse. Through a window, he sees brightly lit rooms and armed researchers working on a massive alien spacecraft, guarded by a heavily armed security team. Meanwhile, Scully, investigating Betsy's name, arrives at an address where she's greeted by two unfamiliar women. They seem to know Scully and reveal that they were once abducted by aliens for experimentation. Previously, Scully herself had been abducted by aliens, only to be returned with all memories of the event erased. As the women recount their experiences, Scully begins to recall some of her own abduction memories. The aliens seem to have injected something into her abdomen during the abduction. It turns out that not just these two women, but several others were also abducted. They all have one thing in common, a scar on the back of their necks where a tiny microchip was implanted. The women then show Scully the microchip they had removed, and Scully grows increasingly panicked because she too had one removed from her neck. Finally, they take Scully to meet Betsy, who is now dying of cancer. The two women tell Scully that they don't know exactly what the aliens did to them, but all the women who were abducted eventually succumb to cancer, which seems to be their final fate. The scene shifts to Mulder returning to his apartment. To his surprise, his superior, Skinner, is waiting for him. Skinner tells Mulder that the Japanese diplomat Mulder had arrested was murdered after being released. The Japanese government believes his murder happened because he lost the briefcase, which Mulder had confiscated. Now Japan is preparing to file a diplomatic lawsuit. Skinner wants Mulder to return the briefcase and warns him that everything he does is being monitored, and continuing his investigation could put his life in danger. Mulder then visits a senator's office for help. The senator works in intelligence and admires Mulder's fearless attitude. He tells Mulder that a few days ago, 4 Japanese scientists came to the U.S. to work on a classified project to dissect alien life. Afterward, they were all murdered. The senator managed to get hold of the scientists' names and hopes Mulder can dig deeper to uncover the truth. Mulder searches the list and finds a photo of several Japanese scientists from World War II. Scully comes to Mulder's office and claims she recognizes one of the doctors in the photo. However, this doctor died back in 1965. Despite this, Scully vividly remembers that the same doctor performed surgery on her during her alien abduction, and he also appeared in the alien autopsy footage. Meanwhile, Mulder goes to the carriages where the alien dissection took place, hiding at a distance to observe. A few cars pull up, and Mulder sees a living alien being escorted onto the carriage. The Japanese group loads the alien into the carriage and drives it away. To keep up with the carriage, Mulder decides to hop onto another train following the same route. At the same time, a high-ranking member of a mysterious organization contacts Scully. He tells her that Mulder's every move is being monitored by the organization. If Mulder boards the train to follow the alien carriage, he will be putting himself in extreme danger. Hearing this, Scully decides to call Mulder to warn him off the investigation, but Mulder refuses to listen. Mulder boards the train, but during the process he accidentally loses his cell phone. He continues to follow the carriage on its unknown journey. The episode ends here. In this story, an alien spaceship crashed into the ocean, and a mysterious organization sent the Troph salvage ship to retrieve it. Inside the ship, they discovered an alien, and the craft was sent to a naval shipyard for research, which is what Mulder saw. The alien was then transported to Tennessee in carriage 82594, where 4 Japanese medical scientists were brought in to perform the dissection. It appears that the Japanese government is somehow involved in all of this. As we discussed in earlier episodes, there is a multinational secret organization involving Germany, Italy, Japan, and the US, dedicated to researching extraterrestrial life. This is likely the reason the US released the Japanese diplomat under pressure, because they feared the mysterious organization. The deaths of the scientists at the start of the episode indicate internal conflict within the organization or the emergence of a rival armed faction. Mulder being relentlessly pursued shows that his every move is indeed being watched by the organization, making his mission highly dangerous. The scene shifts to a military team entering an isolated leper colony research facility. Located in a remote area, the team gathers several unusual patients, transporting them out to the outskirts. These patients all have faces that resemble aliens, and shortly after, they are all shot dead. Meanwhile, Mulder, who ignores Scully's warnings, boards the train. He intends to enter the carriage containing the alien, but finds the door is locked with a code. He then locates the conductor and, claiming to be a federal agent, asks to be let into the carriage. The conductor, however, knows nothing about the carriage's contents, only that a Japanese doctor had recently been in and out of it. The conductor then takes Mulder to the doctor's room, where Mulder finds the doctor's research notes. Seeing the conductor's honesty, Mulder hands him a gun and tells him that if he sees any suspicious people, he should hold them at gunpoint and wait for Mulder to return. On the other side, a member of the mysterious organization tells Scully that if she wants answers, she should look into the microchip implanted in the back of her head. Scully takes the chip to the relevant department, where the researchers inform her that the chip is capable of replicating human memories, but the source of the technology is currently unknown. However, after the chip is split open, they discover it has the name of a Japanese manufacturer stamped on it, and the only records they've found are of the chip being mailed to a Japanese doctor. The shipping address leads them to the leper colony research facility. From this, it becomes clear that the Japanese doctor who implanted Scully's chip is the same person the conductor mentioned, and he's now on the train. Along with him is the assassin who has been hunting him. The assassin kills the doctor. But who is this assassin, and why did he kill the Japanese doctor? The plot continues as Mulder discovers the doctor's body. He realizes there must be an assassin on board the train. He grabs his gun and heads to the carriage with the alien, only to find the door to the carriage unlocked. It appears the assassin managed to get the code before killing the doctor. However, there's another coded door inside the carriage. Peeking through the keyhole, Mulder sees the living alien inside. Just then, the assassin, hidden in the shadows, rushes in to strangle Mulder. As Mulder begins to lose ground, the conductor arrives and, using the gun Mulder gave him, attempts to take control of the situation. However, the conductor is too afraid to shoot and quickly runs out of the carriage, locking the door behind him. Now, Mulder and the assassin are trapped inside the carriage. The assassin reveals his identity, claiming to be from the NSA. He says there's a bomb in the carriage and that someone wants to blow up the alien. Mulder is skeptical, especially since the assassin has already killed several Japanese people. The scene then shifts back to Scully. Following the address from the email, Scully arrives at the leper colony research facility. Here, she meets some of the remaining survivors. They tell Scully that a military team came through recently and killed several of the unusual patients, which ties into the scene we saw earlier. After killing these patients, the military did not leave immediately. Instead, they arrested Scully. The officer in charge explains that the facility was originally a sanatorium for lepers, until one day the Japanese doctor was placed there. He secretly conducted human experiments on the patients. The officer then takes Scully to the place where the doctor carried out his experiments, a carriage identical to the one Mulder is currently in. Upon learning the truth, Scully immediately asks the officer to help her contact Mulder. Since Mulder's phone was lost, the officer contacts the assassin. Scully uses the assassin's mobile phone to explain everything to Mulder. It turns out there was never any alien abduction case. The notorious doctor not only used patients for experiments, but also kidnapped normal people like Scully to conduct his studies. What Mulder thought was an alien spaceship was actually a Russian submarine that had been salvaged, and there is indeed a bomb on the train, planted in the ventilation system of the carriage. If they don't escape now, it'll be too late. Mulder tells the assassin to remove the ventilation cover, and sure enough, they find a timed bomb. With just 1 hour and 40 minutes left until detonation, Mulder hangs up and immediately notifies the conductor through the window, instructing him to change the tracks and leave their carriage in an isolated area. Afterward, Mulder calls Scully to share some final words. The carriage had already been locked, and they only knew the password to get in, not the one to get out. Now, he and the assassin can only wait for their inevitable death. In truth, Mulder already knew that the assassin, the officer who revealed the truth to Scully, and the Japanese doctor involved in the whole affair were all members of a multinational secret organization. This group, with participation from the US, Germany, Japan, and Italy, was focused on developing advanced alien technology. The being inside the carriage wasn't a real alien, it was a hybrid, part alien, part human, a successful experiment. The alien genes had extraordinary healing abilities, making the hybrid resistant to human weaponry. If a whole army of hybrids could be created, they would dominate on the battlefield. The US government had protected and provided a facility for the Japanese doctor during World War II, hoping he would help them create a successful alien hybrid. However, after his success, the doctor secretly contacted the Japanese government, planning to move the experiment to his own country. As a result, the US government authorized the mysterious organization to hunt down the people involved in the experiment. They even planted a bomb on the carriage. If the doctor wasn't going to share, they'd destroy the research. No one would get it. At this point, there were just 6 minutes left before the bomb went off. Scully, while watching the alien autopsy footage, discovered the doctor's door password. She quickly called Mulder to inform him. Just as Mulder input the password, the assassin knocked him out cold. The assassin had planned to leave Mulder to die, but unexpectedly, the member from the organization arrived, killed the assassin, and saved Mulder. Shortly after, the bomb exploded, and both the assassin and the alien hybrid were reduced to ashes. In the end, the government cleaned up all the traces of the case and took the doctor's research notes. Mulder, once again, was left with nothing. The scene shifts to the Bible, recounting that the Savior, Jesus, was nailed to a cross, with iron nails driven through his palms. This day is known as Good Friday, the day of Jesus' suffering. According to legend, every now and then a person's palms will spontaneously crack open and bleed, with the wound resembling a nail mark. However, there's no pain, and the wound heals quickly on its own. These mysterious wounds are called stigmata. The following story revolves around this phenomenon. In a church in the US, a priest is giving a sermon when suddenly blood begins to pour from his hands. The congregation believes this to be the stigmata of legend, and they're in awe. No one notices a middle-aged man quietly observing the scene with a cold stare. After the sermon, the priest goes backstage to remove his makeup, and the middle-aged man follows him. Without saying a word, the man strangles the priest to death. When Mulder and Scully arrive at the scene, a witness reports that the priest's hands bled during the sermon, but Scully doesn't see any wounds. Mulder then dips his finger into the blood on the floor and tastes it. It's just red syrup. It turns out the priest was a fraud, using fake blood packets to deceive the congregation. Mulder reveals that in the past 3 years, 11 con artists like this priest have been killed, and he believes the same person is behind all of these murders. Elsewhere in a small-town school, a boy named Kevin is called up to the board by his teacher. As Kevin starts to write, something strange happens. Blood suddenly begins to pour from his hands, and the stigmata appear. Mulder and Scully rush to the school. The teacher explains that Kevin's parents are divorced, and he has been living with his father. Last year, Kevin also bled from his hands, and the school suspected abuse. His father was emotionally unstable, so local authorities placed him in a psychiatric hospital and gave custody of Kevin to his mother. Now that Kevin has bled again, they suspect his mother is abusing him and plan to temporarily remove Kevin from her care, placing him in a shelter until they can figure out what's really happening. Mulder believes that if Kevin has stigmata, he could become a target for the killer, so he tracks down Kevin's father, who's still in the psychiatric hospital. Kevin's father says that Kevin has always been different since birth, and dark forces have always tried to harm him. Before they leave, he tells Scully that she must take a detour to uncover the truth. Scully is confused, wondering if he meant physically. The father just tells her she'll understand later. Next, at the shelter, Kevin is telling a bedtime story to his friends when a strange, bald man enters. The man looks at Kevin's stigmata and then takes him away. Mulder and Scully suspect that Kevin has been kidnapped. Using descriptions from the other children, they quickly create a sketch of Skinner and trace him to his home. Skinner looks terrifying, but he's not a criminal. He claims he received a message from God, warning that a demon's messenger would try to harm Kevin. The man took Kevin to protect him, keeping him hidden in his home. But when Mulder and Scully barged in, Kevin was nowhere to be found. Skinner is deeply concerned for Kevin's safety. He immediately jumps out of a window, breaking it, and easily slips out of his handcuffs. Then, as if nothing happened, he stands up and continues running. Kevin missed his mother. He returned home only to find that she wasn't there. Instead, he ran into the killer who had come looking for him. Quick-thinking Kevin immediately hid. As the killer searched the house for Kevin, the bald man suddenly burst in. He tackled the killer, buying time for Kevin to escape, but was then strangled to death by the killer. Kevin, now on the run, encountered Mulder and Scully. They soon discovered the bald man's body, still warm, but clearly strangled. When Scully performed an autopsy, she found that the body hadn't stiffened even after 14 hours and still held the warmth of a living person, making her more convinced that this was a supernatural case. Despite the bald man's terrifying appearance, he was actually a saint. Mulder disagreed, thinking the man was just deluded by his faith. The killer's hands emitted intense heat, which had left burn marks and his fingerprints on Skinner's neck. Scully managed to extract 2 fingerprints from the marks and, using them, identified the killer. He was a wealthy, influential businessman who had visited Israel 3 years ago. After returning, he began experiencing hallucinations, believing he was a messenger of the devil, determined to defy God. But that didn't explain how he could leave fingerprints on someone with such heat. Meanwhile, Kevin's mother was out with him when their car broke down. The killer approached, pretending to help her fix the car, but when she saw him touch the car's hot engine without getting hurt, she became suspicious. She immediately warned Kevin to run, but the killer pushed her aside and chased after him. After he left, something strange happened. Kevin, who had already run away from the car, suddenly appeared and helped his mother up. How could he be in 2 places at once? Kevin's mother immediately drove off with him. Meanwhile, the killer realized that the Kevin he had chased had disappeared right before his eyes. To better protect Kevin, Scully suggested keeping him close by. She believed the events surrounding Kevin were so extraordinary that maybe she was the messenger sent by God to protect him. Mulder mocked her for this idea. Just then, while Kevin was in the bathroom, he mysteriously vanished. The bathroom window, which had been welded shut, was now bent open by some unseen force. Scully rushed to the psychiatric hospital to see Kevin's father, hoping he could provide more clues. But he had been sedated with a large dose of tranquilizers and couldn't remember anything. Outside the hospital, Scully spotted a large garbage bin with a recycling symbol on it. She remembered that Kevin's father had once told her that to find the truth, she would need to take a detour. Recalling that there was a nearby waste disposal plant, Scully wondered if this detour was referring to that. She decided to visit the plant, while Mulder, thinking the killer might have already taken Kevin and fled, insisted on checking the airport's entry and exit records. Scully went alone to the plant and, sure enough, found the killer and Kevin there. The killer had planned to perform some sort of ritual, but Scully's arrival startled him. He climbed to a high place with Kevin but accidentally fell into a shredder, while Kevin grabbed the railing and survived. At the end of the story, Kevin seemed much more mature after everything he had been through. He packed his things and shook Scully's hand to say goodbye. It was then that we saw the scars on his hands had disappeared, perhaps signaling that Kevin, having survived the ordeal, was now ready to start a new life. In the story, Kevin's stigmata and his mysterious doppelgangers in times of crisis could suggest that Kevin is a messenger of God, and each time he experiences stigmata, it signals a coming trial. Kevin's teacher told Scully that Kevin had experienced stigmata the previous year, perhaps signaling another trial he faced. However, at that time, Kevin was protected by his father, and this time, though his father was in the psychiatric hospital, he was protected by both the bald man and Scully. The scene shifts to a middle-aged man with glasses who had a cockroach infestation at his home, so he hired a pest control company to deal with the problem. The employees were spraying insecticide throughout the house, but strangely, one cockroach, which was perched on a cabinet, wouldn't die no matter how many times the insecticide was sprayed on it. The exterminator, frustrated, stomped on the cockroach, but it didn't crush it. Almost immediately, the worker began feeling suffocated. By the time the man returned, the exterminator was dead, with several cockroaches crawling over his body. Afterward, Mulder arrives in this small town. He had seen news reports about unidentified flying objects and strange beams of light appearing in the sky at night, so he decided to come and observe. The local sheriff, noticing Mulder out so late, suspected he might be hiding something and approached him to check his credentials. Upon seeing that Mulder was from the FBI, the sheriff immediately switched his attitude. Mulder explained that he was here specifically to investigate the UFOs. Just then, the sheriff's radio crackled. There had been a bizarre death at the pest control worker's house. Mulder followed the sheriff to the scene. The homeowner, the man with glasses, was a fuel researcher specializing in new fuels. He insisted that the worker had been killed by the cockroaches since there were several on his body when he died. He also mentioned that this event had left him traumatized and he would have to stay in a hotel that night. Since Mulder wasn't familiar with autopsies, he called Scully, who was still at home. Scully suspected that the man might have died from an allergic reaction to the cockroaches, leading to a fatal shock. While the chances were slim, it was still a possibility. Meanwhile, 3 reckless young men were using chemical tools to extract methane from manure. They were inhaling the methane from the manure, a smell so potent it made their heads spin. One of the young men even said he loved the dizzying effect of the stench. No one noticed a cockroach crawling out from the manure. Soon, the guy began to hallucinate, seeing a cockroach moving under his skin. In a panic, he grabbed a sharp object and cut his arm open. His 2 friends immediately called the police, and by the time Mulder arrived, the young man had died from a deep artery wound caused by the blade. Mulder called Scully to fill her in, asking her to come help investigate. However, Scully believed the young man had simply overdosed on methane and hallucinated due to the fumes. After hanging up, Mulder found a cockroach at the scene and quickly captured it, placing it in a bottle. But something was strange about this cockroach. It had an unusually hard, sharp exoskeleton, almost like metal. Mulder's hand was scratched by the cockroach's shell. The local doctor treated Mulder's wound, but later that day, the doctor was also killed by a cockroach in his bathroom. That was a lot of cockroach-related deaths in just one day. Things were getting eerie. Mulder desperately needed Scully's help, but no matter how many times he called, she refused to come. At the local Department of Agriculture, Mulder met a beautiful entomologist. She believed that a new species of cockroach had been discovered in the town. Unlike regular cockroaches, these ones were attracted to light and didn't shy away from humans. However, she didn't believe the cockroaches would kill anyone. What was truly odd, though, was that the exoskeleton of this new species seemed to carry an electric charge. No one had ever seen anything like these cockroaches before. But the big question was, where were these cockroaches coming from? To investigate the case, Mulder stayed overnight at a local hotel. Just as he was settling in, he heard that another man had been killed by cockroaches at the hotel. There were cockroaches crawling on the man's body, but by the time Mulder arrived, they had all disappeared. At this point, we notice a guest, none other than the fuel researcher. He was really having a bad time, encountering cockroaches everywhere he went. Soon, the autopsy reports for the first few victims came in. The pest control worker died from an allergic reaction to insecticide. The young man died from hallucinations caused by methane gas. The doctor died from a ruptured aneurysm, and the man at the hotel died from a heart attack caused by being terrified by the cockroaches, as he had a pre-existing heart condition. So looking at all this, it seemed like the cockroaches weren't directly responsible for any of the deaths. But was it just a coincidence that so many people died in a short span? While at the hotel, Mulder found a few cockroach legs. He sent them to the entomologist for analysis. She discovered that these weren't regular cockroaches, they seemed more like mechanical ones. Mulder took the legs to a robotics research facility. The scientist there examined the legs under a microscope and said that it was beyond his understanding. Judging by his expression, these cockroaches seemed to be from a technology far more advanced than what humanity has reached. Meanwhile, Scully arrived in town, worried about Mulder's safety. She found that the town was in a panic due to the cockroach deaths. People were hoarding supplies and insecticides. Scully then called Mulder, reminding him of the fuel researcher from the first case and that his project involved methane gas. Methane comes from manure, and the company had been using imported animal manure for research, so it could be possible that cockroaches got mixed in with the manure samples, accidentally ending up in the town. Mulder immediately rushed to the research facility. By this time, the fuel researcher had gone insane, convinced that the cockroaches were after him and trying to kill him. No matter how much Mulder tried to talk to him, he wouldn't listen. The man was running around shooting in a methane-filled factory, and the gunshots ignited the gas, causing an explosion that destroyed the factory and left Mulder and Scully covered in manure. The next morning, the local fire department arrived to deal with the aftermath. The sheriff told them that the previous night had seen 4 fires, 18 car accidents, and 13 brawls, all resulting in 36 injuries. These incidents were all due to poisoning from overuse of insecticides. On a positive note, there were no more reports of deaths from cockroaches that night. With that, the episode comes to an end. While the story seemed to be about people dying from cockroaches, in reality, the cockroaches hadn't harmed anyone. The autopsy reports showed that the first victim died from an allergic reaction to insecticide. As the sheriff mentioned at the end, the town had experienced many incidents that night due to people panicking and overusing insecticides, leading to hallucinations. So, it could be deduced that insecticide is the real culprit behind the chain of deaths. The second victim died from hallucinations caused by excessive methane inhalation, certainly not the cockroach's fault. The third victim died from a ruptured aneurysm, which could have been triggered by the insecticide poisoning. The fourth victim, due to his heart condition, was simply scared to death by the cockroaches, with no foul play involved. Now, let's turn our attention back to the cockroaches themselves. These cockroaches that appeared in the town weren't afraid of insecticides and couldn't be crushed. Mulder discovered that their exoskeletons were incredibly hard, almost like metal, and they even scratched his hand. Clearly, these cockroaches were unlike any others. The entomologist explained that their exoskeletons were electrically charged. They resembled mechanical cockroaches. But where did they come from? Mulder originally came to the town because of news reports about UFOs in the area. These cockroaches might very well be advanced alien technology. They don't seem to pose a threat to humans. They are more like surveillance devices. Witnesses reported that the cockroaches would crawl on the bodies of the dead, likely collecting data before quickly leaving the scene. As for Scully's theory that they came from imported manure, it can be safe to say that the manure likely contained regular cockroaches. A large number of cockroaches mixed in with the manure ended up at the research facility, which caused the cockroach population to explode in the town. This could explain why cockroaches were appearing everywhere. In the final moments, the sheriff reported that no further cockroach-related deaths had been reported that night. It was because the heavy rain diluted the toxins in the town's air, and the explosion at the research facility killed many of the cockroaches hiding in the manure. This restored some peace to the town. As for the mechanical cockroaches, once they had finished collecting their data, they would return to the UFO, so there was nothing to worry about. The scene shifts to a young man unexpectedly passing away. His friends in the town spontaneously gather to mourn him. One friend is particularly devastated and quietly cries off to the side. 2 blonde girls approach to comfort him, and the man offers to drive them home. On the way, the girls mention satanic rituals, speculating that the young man who died might have been sacrificed by Satan's followers, which led to his premature death. The next morning, the police find the man's car parked on the side of the road, but the man himself is found hanging from a cliff, seemingly strangled with a rope and then pushed over the edge. Mulder and Scully are invited to the town by a local agent to help investigate. The agent mentions that this is the third case case of a young person being killed in the town. There's a rumor going around that a satanic cult is on the hunt for sacrifices, and the agent suspects these young people were victims of the cult. Scully is both amused and frustrated by this theory and was about to refute it when suddenly the man's coffin catches fire and even his portrait is destroyed. Mulder can't help but exclaim in surprise that he didn't see that coming. Mulder and Scully separately question the two blonde sisters who were with the man the night before. Strangely, their stories match almost perfectly. They claim that on the way home they were stopped by satanic cult members who were performing a ritual. The girls say they saw the cultists in action, then fled in terror. During the escape, the man was captured and hanged from the cliff. They both tearfully recount the event. After the interrogation, Mulder and Scully conclude that the two girls are simply lying. There's no evidence of any ritual site near the area, and their stories are so poorly fabricated that it's easy to see through their deception. Meanwhile, at the town's sports field, the two sisters are watching a game. It's obvious both girls have their eyes on a handsome young man named Muscle. They enthusiastically wave at him, but Muscle seems uninterested. He quickly turns to greet his girlfriend with a hug, which stirs up jealousy in both girls. Then, in a strange turn of events, the girlfriend inexplicably trips and falls flat on her face right under their gaze. Meanwhile, a player on the field collides with the drink table, spilling drinks all over the two sisters. They're furious, and just minutes later, that same player is crushed to death by a malfunctioning stadium seat. This bizarre series of events leads everyone to suspect that the two girls may have some kind of supernatural power. Anyone who crosses them seems to face dire consequences. With several young people dead, the town is thrown into a panic. The residents are convinced that the satanic cult is behind it all, so they organize themselves to find the killers, vowing to dig to the ends of the earth to uncover the truth. To their surprise, they actually uncover something, a briefcase containing several bone fragments. Without hesitation, the townspeople declare it's the remains of a child. The briefcase has a nameplate with the local doctor's name on it, and his odd, eye-catching appearance leads to his arrest. However, it turns out to be a mix-up. The bones are from a dead pet dog, not a child. The whole situation seems strange, and the town is definitely off. Even Mulder starts feeling the odd effects of the town. He begins embarrassing Scully in public, something he's never done before, and starts drinking excessively, something he's never done. He almost ends up in an uncomfortable situation with the unhinged local agent. Even Scully, who's usually calm, starts getting unusually irritable. She tries to watch Daniel C.C. horror movies for some peace, but after flipping through several channels, all she sees is the same show over and over. This prompts Mulder to seriously question whether there's something wrong with the town. At a party in town, the two sisters team up again to kill Muscle's girlfriend. Afterward, the two act as though nothing has happened and go to comfort a distraught Muscle. However, Muscle is too upset to care about them, which makes the elder sister furious, and she wants to take revenge on him. But the younger sister disagrees. She is infatuated with Muscle and doesn't want to hurt him. It seems this man has caused a rift between the two sisters, who are almost like twins. In front of Muscle, the two girls actually start fighting using their supernatural powers. After a brief battle, neither of the two sisters are hurt. Instead, they accidentally kill Muscle, who had been watching from the sidelines. Bad luck indeed. Realizing they've killed him, the sisters panic and run off in separate directions. The younger sister heads straight to Mulder, while the elder sister finds Scully and the local agent. The sisters both accuse each other of being witches and blaming each other for the string of deaths. The group decides to take the two women to the police station for questioning. However, when they meet, chaos breaks out. Tables and chairs fly around, guns go off on their own, and everyone is left terrified and confused. Mulder quickly realizes the situation is spiraling out of control, so he locks both girls in the interrogation room, telling them to settle their grudges between themselves first. After a flash of lightning, the clock on the wall strikes midnight. Oddly enough, at that exact moment, everything stops. The group opens the door expecting to find destruction, but instead, the two girls are huddled in a corner, terrified. The residents are unable to connect these seemingly fragile girls to the murders and still believe that satanic followers are to blame. In the final moments, Mulder, still with many questions, visits a fortune teller. The details of what the fortune teller says are unclear, but it seems to involve a rare astrological event like a planetary alignment that affects the town's behavior. Essentially, the town's unique geography has put its people under the influence of the planets, causing them to act in unusual ways. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.